Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio, and today I'm going to be reviewing The Siege of Runedar from designer Reiner Knizia and publisher Ludanova Games. In The Siege of Runedar, you are collaboratively, in a cooperative way, working together as a team of dwarves, and you're trying to protect the gold that you have stored in the middle of your kind of fortress, and it's being besieged by orcs and goblins and trolls. And the way you do so is by digging a tunnel so that you can take your stash of gold and run away. Well, that's the theme. Let's head over to the table. I'll show you how it works. Then we'll come back here and I'll give you my final thoughts. Alright, here we see the setup for a two-player game of the Siege of Runedar. The really only difference that comes into play when you have player count is that it's going to change which side of this kind of market board that you start with. The last thing I wanted to point out is that the difficulty in the game is determined by the amount of rubble that you place in this area right here. So if you wanted to do the easy mode, you'd pop in 6 pieces of rubble. If you wanted to go to the normal mode, you put in 8. So we'll pop those 8 in there. If you wanted to go hard, you can go 10. And if you wanted to go epic, you can go 12. But let's just set it up for a normal mode. In the game, we are playing as dwarves. There are 2 dwarves there in the center of our castle. You might be able to tell that this is actually the bottom of the game box. It just sits in here like this. And you pretty much have your play area there in the bottom of the box. We are playing as dwarves. We are trying to protect our gold stash here from oncoming hordes of baddies. We've got orcs. We've got goblins. We have trolls. All right? And so they are all trying to come in and steal our gold. We cannot have that. So what we're trying to do is craft better weapons and items that can help us to defend this stronghold, but more importantly, we're trying to dig a tunnel out underneath the mountain so that we can take our gold and leave. We win the game if we can clear off all of these blocks, these large blocks here, and get a hole dug out with at least one of our gold nuggets left. There are multiple lose conditions that I'll talk about as we go on. But essentially, this is a deck building game with a couple of little twists. We have our 2 dwarves here, and they start with identical decks of cards, okay? And so there's a couple of things I'll point out about these cards. The color in the upper left there shows that this is the starting cards for this yellow-colored dwarf here. In the upper left, you see a movement value. So you can play a card for multiple different effects. You can play this card to move 2 spots, or you can play it to gather 1 resource, 1 iron resource in this case, or you could do a melee attack. So we've got something similar here, a movement of 2, gather a wood resource, do a melee attack. Here we can gather 1 of any type of resource. Here is a orc card. There's 2 that are always going to be in your hand. Your hand is always going to be made up of 12 cards. There's a couple of other little icons I want to show you here. This is a ranged attack. This is a dig action. All right. And then we've got the other resource of kind of pelt there or fur. All right. So the way it works is that you shuffle up your deck of 12. All right. And both players would be doing this. And you're going to randomly choose 2 cards and place them underneath your little token here. So you don't know what cards are under there. Could both of the bad orc cards be under there? It's unlikely, but it's possible. All right, so the other player would do the same thing. They'd shuffle up their cards. They would randomly remove 2 and put them underneath their little tile here. All right, so what's going to happen is on your turn, you're going to draw 5 cards, and that's going to be your hand. All right, the way that the turn structure is set up is that you're going to do everything in this particular order. If either the siege tower or the catapult are in your play area at the beginning of your turn, you have to activate those. But those aren't going to come out at the beginning of the game. What you're going to then do is play any orc cards, if you have any in your hand, and then you're going to play all the dwarf cards that are left. All right, so we flip this over. This is our starting 5. Unlucky for me, I actually drew both of my orc cards in my initial draw. All right, so I have to evaluate those one at a time. This is the deck. This is a seeded deck where they get progressively more difficult. You can see 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and then 5s. Now they're random within those, but they are seeded. All right, you flip them over. So this is going to tell us a couple of pieces of information. It's going to tell us if any of these orcs are going to be showing up outside of the walls. And in this case, there's going to be one showing up on the right side. So you take a troll there, and you place it outside the wall. Okay? This particular card also shows an arrow. And this means that every orc advances 1 towards the center of your gold hoard there. Now, we placed 1 first. Now, that means that he's going to immediately move right up there. All right? Marching towards my gold, which I don't want. But we had 2 orc cards, so let's find out what the next one is. This next one tells me that there's 1 on the opposite side, but there is no arrow, so not going to advance. So I would place 1 right there. If this one had an arrow, both this one would advance and this one would advance, again, ever closer towards the center. All right, now I could play my cards. I have 3 cards left. Excuse me, 3 cards left. They all have a 2 movement. They've got resource gathering, and they've got a melee attack. So let me show you an attack just because it's fun. I'm going to play this card just to move 2. This is the yellow. You don't move, there really is no diagonal. You can just move 1 and 2. Now, I'm on the wall with that baddie, with that orc. I've got 2 cards that show this melee, 2 cards that show that melee attack symbol. So I could roll 2 dice. All right, here are the dice. Let me show you the different faces here. We've got a 1, a 2, and a 3. We've got a couple of 1s, a 2 and a 3, and we've got a couple of crossbows. All right. It takes 2 hits to do 1 damage on those. I'm rolling 2 dice. So I'm hoping for a total of 2 of these bursts showing here. All right, and I rolled 3. Okay, so that would take out that orc. He would go back into the supply, and then that troll's turn is done. They played all 5 of their cards. The next troll would go ahead and take their turn. They'd draw their 5. They would evaluate their cards. This one got lucky. No orc cards, so you don't have to do any of those. Let me show you a dig. Here's a dig card. Let's say that we played this card to move, and then we played this card to do 1 dig. That's how you remove the rubble. All right, so you're playing those cards to remove the rubble. Why are you gaining or gathering resources? Well, first of all, you have to be in an area with that resource and have that card showing. So if I was in that wood workshop and I had this card, I could gather 1 wood. When you gather resources, and also, you can only do that if there are no baddies there. If there is an orc there, you can't gather that wood until you take that orc out. You place resources onto these upgrade cards, okay? And the costs of them are shown along the bottom. So the base cost of this one is 1 iron, but you have to consult the board, and it shows that it's additionally 2 wood. So maybe I would place this wood there. Throughout the game, you're placing resources on cards, hopefully trying to get yourself set up to take some of these cards into your hand to build them up and make it better. That's the deck building aspect of the game. At any point, you can gather one of these cards if they have all of the resources necessary. So for example, this card has all the resources necessary, 1 iron, 2 wood. The trick here is that I said at the beginning, you're only going to ever have 12 cards in your hand. So what you have to do is if you want to take this card, you'd pay the resources back, but you have to get rid permanently out of the game 1 card from your hand or a card that you played. And it can never be one of the orc cards. You're always going to have those 2 orc cards in there. You can't get through any of those. So it's going to give you a better card. In this case, you would harvest 3 wood from that workshop instead of just 1. Also, these don't refill automatically. You can be removing cards, putting them into your different hands to get better. If you end your turn in the center, at that point, you could then choose to refill. You could even discard cards that are already there. There are 3 different decks, a yellow, a gray, and a red. The game starts with 5 yellow cards out, but if you want to get better cards out, you can start putting the gray ones or even the red ones out there. They're going to be more expensive, but they're going to be better cards. They're going to be more powerful. There are also in the game, I'm going to want to show you one of these. They're probably going to be the red cards primarily. I'm trying to find my magic. Oh, right here. There's actually one right here. This is a magic weapon. You see how it has that infinity symbol there? That means that this is one of the cards, the only type of card that you can move anywhere, and you can also do one of the actions. So you can move and do one of the actions. Normally, you're either playing it for movement or for one of the actions. Ranged attack is going to work in such a way that if you have one of these in front of you, the catapult here or the siege engine, those are going to come out in later stages. All right, so there's a catapult there, for example, and you can see these cards get progressively nasty. There's a siege engine for you there. You can try to roll these ranged attacks by playing ranged cards to defeat these that are in front of a player. If they're not, you have to evaluate them at the beginning of the turn. The way they work is that if you have the siege tower in front of you, you're going to have to bring out one of these nasty trolls here. You flip over randomly, there's a stack of these troll tiles, and it's going to tell you what the qualification is to defeat it. In this case, quite a bit of damage. These would go right here into this area. Okay? So that's something that can happen. Also, a catapult can be in front of you. If that happens, what you do is you randomly draw off the top of the catapult deck, and it's basically going to burn one of these regions. So in this case, I flip this over. Spot number 3 is gone. Now, you can no longer gather a card there. And if there were any resources on the card that was there, they get removed. You also lose a gold nugget for that. How else do you lose gold nuggets? You lose gold nuggets when orcs come into your center area. They would take a gold nugget that I just threw across the table, and then they would go back to the supply. You can lose the game if you run out of all your gold nuggets. You can lose the game if you go through all of these tiles. You can lose the game if you go through this deck without doing your goal, which is, again, to clear out these rubble. Every time you clear out the rubble, you're going to remove the rightmost big block there, and you're going to have 2 goblins come out. They're going to have different things you need to do to defeat them. So in the case of this goblin, you have to give them 2 resources. In the case of this goblin, 2 damage. They would go here. Once you dealt with them by fulfilling whatever their requirements are, they get removed. The rubble gets refilled. And you keep going. These get progressively more difficult. The level 2 goblins are more difficult than the level 1. Onward and forward, removing. If you can defeat the final 2 goblins, and there are a pool of these tokens that get, that are stacked progressively, then you win the game. That's the only way you win the game, is by clearing out the tunnel to get out with having some of your gold left. There's more to it, but that's the basics. Let's head back over and I'll let you know what I think. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea on how the Siege of Runedar plays. I didn't cover everything. There are some one-time use cards that you can use if you get in a tough bind that I didn't show on camera, but essentially you're playing your cards, trying to dig out that rubble, and dealing with the ever-present onslaught of baddies. All right, first thing I want to do is talk about some benchmarks. These are high-level ideas that I like to look at when I'm assessing the positives and negatives of a game. The first thing is setup and teardown. And in Siege of Runedar, that setup is aided quite a bit by the fact that the bottom of the box has the insert that is essentially your gaming space. And as you saw in the overview, really what you're doing then is laying out a series of wooden components that make up the resources. You've got your baddies that are standees. You could keep those put together. They go into the box as they are, and you lay out some cards. Not a whole lot of setup and tear down, and the fact that everything is stored within that box kind of as is aids in the speed of that. The other thing I like to talk about are rules, and in the Siege of Runedar, I found that the rules were overall well written, well structured, and I didn't really have any difficulties in understanding how the game played out. There were a couple of little things that were easy to miss, even though they were kind of accentuated with bold print in the book. So just make sure you read through the book carefully. Everything is there, but there are a couple of little exceptions to rules that can be a bit easy to miss. Overall, well-written rules, though. The next thing I want to talk about is art and components. First, I'll talk about a couple of things that didn't work as well for me, and then I will mention the things that I really did enjoy. First of all, the back of the cards have kind of this black color, and that can show some chipping. And you may want to think about sleeving this game. You are shuffling, being a deck building game, you're shuffling a fair amount. So it might not be a bad idea because you don't want to know what cards you have until you draw them. That can really kind of mess things up. And so with the slight color chipping that I've noticed on the cards, that is something to mention. You might want to get some sleeves for it if that is potentially bothersome to you. The other thing I'll mention that is potentially a negative is that while I do like that the box stores everything kind of in that insert, becomes kind of your player area, it is a non-standard box size and it's larger than many typical kind of games of its ilk. And so you might find that a bit annoying. It may not fit in kind of the standard Calyx box shelves that you may have gotten used to. It's a slightly, again, out of the ordinary box size. So just keep that in mind. On the plus side, when you have that, even though you have that kind of non-standard box size, I really love the form factor of this game. I love opening it up and you've got the game board right there. I like the 3D elements of moving those bad guys up and down. It really heightens the sense of thematic immersion because you are literally moving your dwarf around the board. You're going up onto these towers to shoot at them with your crossbows. It really works. I feel like the actual production of the game, that double-edged sword of being larger than normal, the payoff is worth it to me. I really, really like that a lot. I also really like the art in the game. There's no denying that this is a bit of a generic fantasy theme, okay? You've got dwarves, orcs, goblins, trolls. We've seen that before, we've heard that before. But the art by Andrew Bosley is really nice. It's a very, very charming aesthetic. It's cartoon-ish without being childish, if that makes sense. I feel like it does a really nice tone throughout the game. Just a really nice look all throughout the game. All right, overall game impressions. A couple of things that don't work as well for me, and then the things that I did like. One negative is that I feel like the game can feel a bit long. It may go a little bit longer than you're used to seeing in these kind of more entry-level cooperative games. Just through the process of getting through all that rubble, the harder the game, also it can also extend the length because you have more rubble that you have to deal with. And so keep that in mind that it may play a little bit longer than you're used to. The other thing is, I'm not sure that this is going to have the legs for dozens and dozens of plays, especially if you're playing them in quick succession to each other. I feel like if you play it once in a while, then you're going to still be able to get many games out of it and not feel like you've seen it all. That being said, I would not mind seeing some expansions that add a few things that can kind of keep the game fresh, because essentially you're doing the same types of things on your turn. You're gathering resources, you're upgrading cards, you're defeating bad guys, you're digging that rubble. It's a pretty, it's a pretty static loop of gameplay. And so you keep that in mind. The replayability might be slightly lower than you would like. Now, the things that I like. I love the way that the deck building works in this game. It's a deck building game, but not in the traditional sense where you are necessarily building up this huge deck and then you're trying to cull it. No, you're never going to have more than 12 cards in your deck, and I love that. I also love the way that you basically are taking 2 cards of those 12 and you're putting them under your tile there. So you never know for sure if you're going to have 1, 2, or 0 of those orc cards. That is great. Just a really clever little twist on a common mechanism that we have seen deck building. I also really like how the card upgrading works. You're gathering those resources, you're putting them on those cards, and anybody has access to them. You have to decide as a team who is best to have that particular card. You also have to think about how you're going to refill that cards, because they don't refill automatically. As I mentioned in the overview, you have to end your turn in the center area, and then you can choose to wipe the cards that are there and refill them with any of the different types of cards, or you can keep some of the cards that are there and refill them with, gray cards or red cards. Those little decisions seem little, but the more you play the game, the more you realize how crucial those decisions are. Those can really be the difference between winning and losing the game. And so I really like the way that upgrading card system works. Very, very clever. I think the theme works wonderfully. I mentioned earlier that this is a bit of a generic fantasy theme. Yes, but it works really well here. It all makes sense. It's something that is going to have a little bit of comfort, I think, to anybody who has grown up reading fantasy novels, watching fantasy movies, playing fantasy games. There is a lot of dice rolling in the game. However, it's not as luck dependent as I think it might come across the first time or two that you play it. There's more mitigation than you might think right off the bat. And again, the way that those cards are utilized can make a big, big difference in how often you're having to rely on dice rolls. And another thing that I do like about the game is that because there is dice rolling, because there is a fair bit of randomness, you have some stand up and cheer moments or head down groaning moments. There's no two ways about it. There are going to be times when those dice let you do something amazing and you feel incredible, and there are going to be times when you are rolling a bunch of dice and they just don't work for you. And so I do like having that bit of thrill and unknown in a game like this. I feel like it works very well. Overall, I feel like the Siege of Runedar is a game that is going to have a very wide appeal. I feel like it is a game that takes elements that you may be familiar with and changes them enough to create something new and interesting and exciting. I'm going to be giving the Siege of Runedar an 8.5 out of 10, a seal of excellence. This is a game that I look forward to playing more. It's a game that I look forward to introducing new players to, because I really, again, feel like this is a game that could be very popular if it just gets out there in the general public, the gaming public, enough to gain a little bit of buzz. All right, well, there you have it. That's it for me. This is Mike DiLisio signing off from Dice Tower headquarters.